Imagine having to hear these words echoing in the conference room that you yourself helped build. Get out of here! My older brother shouted, slamming his fist hard on the table. Immediately afterward, security stepped forward and escorted me out of the family company, the place where I had poured my entire youth, intellect, and soul into building. All because of a carefully calculated lie from the adopted daughter that my father had brought home many years earlier. That day, I left in silence. Torrential rain soaked through every fiber of my clothes. I carried nothing but my laptop bag. I was only 23 years old. My name is Finley York. Now at 28, I am sitting in the corner office on the top floor of a skyscraper in the heart of Dallas. Outside the glass windows, heavy Texas rain slides down the cold panes. The company I run today is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, built from absolute zero after everything had once been stripped from my hands. There is no longer any family name hanging on this door. Only my name remains. That fateful afternoon 10 years ago is still clear down to every detail. I had just returned after signing a major contract, feeling like I was on top of the world. But what awaited me was a heavy room filled with senior executives, and my brother Hudson standing at the head of the table, his face red with rage. He threw a stack of falsified reports toward me. Then he placed an empty pill bottle on the table, something he insisted had been found in my drawer. Not a single question. Not a single moment of listening. He completely believed the story that had been carefully staged. And in that single moment, he removed me from the company that we were supposed to run together. I left without arguing, without begging, without looking back. The elevator ride down felt endless. When the doors opened in the lobby, the storm outside was already raging fiercely. I walked straight into the rain. No umbrella, no company car, no access card, no authority, no title. Only the weight of betrayal, heavier than the downpour itself. I left thinking my career was over, that everything I had built had vanished in a single afternoon. I had no idea that just a few months later the truth would come crashing down, shattering their perfect narrative, and none of them would realize the tidal wave that was coming. Before I tell you how everything collapsed for them, if you're getting hooked on this story, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Leave a like and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I read every single comment. Thank you for being here. To understand why my own flesh and blood brother turned his back on me so quickly, I have to take you back to the moment when the first cracks began to appear in our family empire. Everything truly began when I was still very young, right after the day my mother vanished from this world. I was only 11 when she died of heart disease. Death didn't come with thunder, but it was cruel in its quiet brutality. In her final days, the pain struck relentlessly, even though she had fought it with fierce determination for years. One week, she was still standing in the kitchen making breakfast for us. The next week, she was gone forever. My father, Philip, didn't cry, at least not in front of anyone. He locked every emotion away as if slamming shut a steel door. Every morning, he went to work like a machine. Every evening he came home, sat motionless in the leather chair in his study, staring blankly into empty space for hours, as though waiting for something that would never return. The small financial consulting firm he had started in our garage a few years earlier nearly collapsed. Not because of the market, but because he no longer had the strength to care about people. 2 years later, my father remarried Diane, and at the same time he decided to adopt Willow Carver. Willow was 20 years old at the time. She was the daughter of an old college friend of my father's who had passed away. He said he wanted to complete the family again. A statement that sounded so noble, so humane, and so impossible to argue against. Willow moved in almost immediately. From the very first day, she called Diane Mom without a moment's hesitation, as if she had rehearsed it for years. Then she began appearing in my father's work, answering phones, organizing client files, sitting in on internal meetings. My father couldn't hide his satisfaction. He praised Willow in front of everyone. Willow was born for this, he would say. She's exactly what this company needs. Meanwhile, Hudson, my older brother, 5 years my senior, was being molded to inherit everything. My father gave him more and more responsibility, meeting major clients, reviewing investment portfolios, approving strategic recommendations. Hudson accepted it all as his birthright. At first, I didn't mind. I was still in school. But I loved numbers, loved the markets, loved the way money moved beneath the surface of decisions that seemed so simple. Whenever I came home, I would quietly sit in the office, read reports, analyze trends, point out new investment patterns I had studied. And they truly made a difference. A few early calls I suggested helped the company land bigger contracts. The client list grew faster than anyone had projected, but no one said much about it. I was just helping out. The second son pitching in for fun. Willow was different. She was clever, patient, and masterful at dimming others' light. Documents I had prepared for client presentations would suddenly accidentally go missing right before the critical moment. She would whisper to longtime staff that I was still finding my way, that I changed my mind too often on investments. In meetings, if I stood up to offer analysis, Willow would smile sweetly, then gently steer the conversation toward a proposal she had prepared in advance. No one noticed it right away. But over the years, those small details piled up like sand in the gears. Gradually, people began to see me as unreliable, someone who needed supervision. While Willow, she became the embodiment of maturity and dependability, the one my father could count on at any moment. The company's ownership structure only twisted things further. Before she died, my mother had set aside significant shares for Hudson and me, real stakes that would become ours as we came of age. Willow had no blood tie, no claim to those shares, yet my father still handed her power, access to accounts, signature authority on certain transactions, a seat at every major decision-making table. And Willow used every bit of it. By her mid-20s, she had burned through whatever separate inheritance she had received: lavish trips, designer clothes, extravagant dinners. Then she plunged into risky ventures with her boyfriend Ethan Moss, a smooth-talking man who always had the next sure thing in his pocket. Those deals collapsed quickly. The money vanished. But Willow never admitted any of it to my father. She kept playing the perfect daughter while the financial hole behind her back grew deeper and bottomless. By the time I turned 20 and started working full-time at the company, the lines were drawn as sharply as if carved with a knife. Hudson was the heir apparent. Willow was the trusted advisor. And I was the one whose ideas were used but rarely named. That imbalance had been smoldering for years, and it was drawing very close to the moment it would take everything from me. When I turned 23, the tension in the company had finally crossed the line where I could no longer pretend not to see it. That afternoon is etched into my memory as if it happened yesterday. I had just returned from an off-site meeting with an ultra-wealthy client, one of the biggest targets we had been chasing all year. I closed the deal right there at the table. Walking back into the building for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally on the right path, that my quiet efforts would at last force everyone to acknowledge them. I headed straight to the executive boardroom to report as usual. But the moment I pushed open the door, I knew something was terribly wrong. Hudson was seated at the head of the table, his hands clenched around a thick stack of financial reports so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. On the table, an empty prescription pill bottle had been shoved forward, rolling slowly like a silent accusation. Along the wall, the senior executives stood in a row, eyes downcast, avoiding my gaze. Willow stood directly behind Hudson's chair, arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed as if she had just finished crying. She was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, but I can't stay silent anymore. I hate having to expose the truth about my own sister like this." Hudson didn't wait for me to sit down. He unleashed a torrent of accusations, one after another. Suspicious transfers, company funds diverted into a personal account bearing my name. Irregular expense patterns that didn't match any client activity. And the pill bottle, an abnormally high quantity allegedly found in my locked desk drawer during a routine office inspection. I started to explain. The transfers were legitimate reallocations for a new fund strategy, all approvals documented. I could pull them up immediately. The expenses tied directly to the marketing campaign for the contract I had just signed. And the pill bottle, it wasn't mine. I had never even seen that brand before. But every time I opened my mouth, Hudson cut me off. "We have transaction logs," he said. "Invoices. Evidence. Willow uncovered it all herself because she was worried about you." He believed her completely. Willow had spent years building that trust, always the last one to leave, the one who caught mistakes, the one who positioned herself as the responsible family member, quietly watching over everything. In Hudson's eyes, Willow could not be wrong. The room fell deathly silent as he continued. No one asked to see my records. No one suggested double-checking the actual transaction history. No one mentioned reviewing desk access logs. The verdict had already been reached. Then Hudson stood up. He pointed straight at the door, his voice rising until it echoed through the room. "Get out of here. I don't need a dishonest employee in this company, even if he's family." Those words hit like a slap across the face. Security appeared just minutes later, already summoned in advance. I handed over my access card company laptop parking pass. My email and system privileges were disabled while I still stood there. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Under the watchful eyes of security, I gathered the few remaining personal items from my office and walked out of the building without looking back. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke the moment I stepped onto the street. Dallas rain poured down in thick, icy sheets as if the entire city had turned its back on me too. The Dallas October rain poured down in thick, relentless sheets, cold and unforgiving. My suit jacket was drenched within minutes, hair plastered to my forehead. I walked aimlessly, heels clicking on the slick pavement, too humiliated to call friends or anyone who would surely ask, what happened? The city blurred around me. Cars sped past, splashing water everywhere. Office lights flickered on one by one as dusk fell. Everything I had built felt stripped away in a single afternoon. Finally, I stopped at a small park a few blocks from the building, collapsing onto a metal bench beneath an oak tree that dripped steadily. The chill seeped deep into my bones, mingling with the exhaustion that had built up over weeks. My head spun. My hands shook, not just from the cold, but from the shock still surging through me. My breathing grew shallow and rapid. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, trying to keep myself from collapsing. Headlights from the nearby road slowed. A silver sedan pulled to the curb, the window rolling down. The driver leaned toward the passenger seat, peering out. Finley York. It was Elaine Ortiz, the senior client relationship director at a bank we had partnered with for years. She had handled many of the firm's largest accounts and attended nearly every major event. I managed only a weak nod. Elaine parked immediately, grabbed an umbrella from the back seat, and hurried toward me. "You're soaked through. At least get in the car out of this awful weather." I followed without protest. Warm air from the heater blasted as she drove me to her nearby apartment. Once inside, she handed me towels, dry clothes from the guest room, then brewed a strong pot of black tea while I huddled on the sofa, wrapped tightly in a blanket. When I could finally speak without my voice trembling, everything poured out. I told her everything that had happened that day, the sudden meeting, the accusations, the way I was escorted out like a criminal. Elaine listened without interrupting, quietly refilling my cup whenever it emptied. When I finished, she set her own cup down and looked me straight in the eye. "I've been in banking for 30 years, she said. "I've seen setups like this before. They look clean on the surface, but the details always feel off when someone wants another person gone fast. Those transfers, that pill bottle, too convenient. Too perfectly timed." She paused for a beat, then continued. If you want, I still have contacts who can quietly pull records. We can check what was actually moved and when. For the first time since leaving the office, the knot in my chest loosened just a little. And that very same night, my grandmother, Violet Pierce, came to pick me up and take me home with her. That same evening, my grandmother, Violet Pierce, drove over to pick me up and take me back to her home in the Dallas suburbs. Violet had never hidden her feelings about Willow or Diane. She had watched the changes in our family from the sidelines for years and never hesitated to voice her skepticism. When I slid into the car, she didn't bombard me with questions. She simply reached over, squeezed my hand once, then quietly pulled away from the curb. Her house was a modest single-story ranch on a quiet street, the kind with a spacious kitchen and hallways lined with family photos. She made soup, toasted bread, pulled out a chair for me at the table, and let me speak whenever I was ready. I told her everything again, slower this time. When I finished, she nodded once, then picked up her phone. By the next morning, she had already reached Vincent Hayes, the family's longtime attorney, who had retired a few years earlier, but still maintained deep connections in the financial world. Vincent agreed to come right away. He arrived before 10 a.m., carrying his familiar leather briefcase and the same calm demeanor I remembered from childhood whenever he visited to handle legal paperwork for the family. We sat in Violet's living room. I recounted every detail I could recall: the reports that were presented, the timing of the discoveries, the way the systems were locked almost instantly. Vincent took notes in a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking concise questions about access privileges, approval chains, and who else still held administrative rights. He offered no comfort or outrage, just precise questions that made me feel for the first time that someone was treating this like a puzzle to be solved, not a verdict already rendered. Before leaving, Vincent called Elaine Ortiz directly from Violet's landline. Elaine had told me she was willing to help, and now she confirmed it straight to Vincent. Within hours, Elaine had pulled preliminary bank statements and transaction logs tied to the company's main operating accounts she still had access to from prior partnerships. What she found quickly came to light. Some transactions bore digital signatures that didn't match my usual authentication patterns or carried odd timestamps. Others originated from IP addresses logged at times when I was in client meetings miles away. Expense codes had been altered after initial entry in action that required higher privileges than I possessed at the time. Vincent reviewed the printouts Elaine emailed over and pointed out each anomaly in his steady voice. "These are starting points," he said. "Enough to demand full forensic data retrieval if it comes to that." He explained the next steps discreetly: formal letters, data preservation requests, quiet conversations through old connections, no drama, only caution and method. Living with Violet gave me room to breathe. Mornings were coffee on the back porch. Afternoons, I spread my personal files across the dining table, reviewing everything. I updated my resume, reached out to a few former clients via my private email, and began rebuilding a network outside the family firm. Nights were harder. Hudson's betrayal and my father's Philip's silence weighed heavily, replaying endlessly in my mind. Still, the fact that Vincent and Elaine had started digging deep changed everything. The sensation of free-falling began to slow. A few weeks later, deeper evidence began to surface, one piece at a time. The investigation unfolded faster than anyone could have anticipated, fueled by the company's state-of-the-art security cameras and meticulously detailed transaction logs. Vincent began with the internal records we could still access legally through lingering administrative backdoors and court-ordered data preservation notices. The office surveillance footage arrived first. Crystal clear, high-definition video that chilled the blood. Willow slipping into my workspace late one night at a time when records confirmed I was miles away. She lingered for exactly 12 minutes at my desk, rifling through drawers, placing the empty prescription bottle in the locked one, then settling into my chair to pull up reports on my monitor, making deliberate, unhurried edits. Another angle from the same evening caught her logging out, locking the door behind her with practiced calm, as if she'd rehearsed the entire performance. The transaction logs drew an even sharper portrait. Every questionable transfer carried metadata that pointed unmistakably to an IP address on the executive floor during hours when only a handful of people remained in the building. Cross-referencing revealed those logins were executed under Hudson's credentials, yet the timestamps overlapped precisely with meetings he was personally leading in the main conference room meetings attended by dozens of witnesses. Someone had remotely hijacked his access, a maneuver possible only for a select few elevated accounts. Vincent assembled it all into an airtight timeline and forwarded copies to a forensic accountant he trusted implicitly. Within days, the pattern emerged: undeniable funds funneled through temporary holding accounts, then scattered to plug personal deficits that traced directly back to Willow's extravagant lifestyle and her string of spectacularly failed investments. The killing blow came from a direction no one saw coming. Federal authorities had quietly been building a sprawling case against Ethan Moss for a multi-state investment fraud scheme. When agents laid out the evidence of wire fraud and the prospect of decades behind bars, Ethan folded almost instantly. In exchange for leniency, he delivered signed statements and complete message histories, laying bare his role. Ethan confirmed that Willow had come to him months earlier, frantic to conceal the gaping losses she could no longer hide. She needed an internal scapegoat to deflect suspicion and buy herself time. He supplied empty prescription bottles from his own expired scripts and helped launder the money through shell companies he controlled. The plan was brutally simple: paint me as unstable and dishonest force, my ouster, and clear the way for Willow to seize deeper control over decisions and accounts. One afternoon, Hudson received the complete dossier from Vincent: video files, log reports, Ethan's sworn affidavit, all delivered via official email with ironclad legal attachments. That same evening, he called my personal number relentlessly. His name flashed across my screen again and again, but I let every call ring out into silence. Whatever he needed to say, apologies, justifications, or raw pain, could wait. I wasn't ready to hear excuses, or to watch him grapple with the ruin of a lie he had swallowed whole without a single moment of doubt. The evidence left no crevice for denial. A mandatory shareholder meeting was scheduled shortly thereafter. The emergency shareholder meeting was convened just weeks later in an atmosphere heavier than anyone in that room had ever experienced. Vincent presented the entire case with surgical precision, step by methodical step, in the main boardroom now packed with major investors and every member of the board. Large screens flickered to life one after another, displaying the compiled evidence, time-synced surveillance video, transaction logs, forensic reports, and Ethan Moss's cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. Each slide locked into the next, sealing every possible escape route. There was no gap left for denial. Willow sat at the far end of the table, flanked by her personal attorney. She tried to interrupt early, claiming misunderstandings and misplaced records. But the footage on the screen swiftly silenced every excuse. When the clip played showing her placing the prescription bottle in my drawer, Willow went utterly still. The entire room followed suit, and that silence held through the rest of the presentation. The vote came almost immediately after Vincent concluded. Willow accepted a plea deal to avoid a full public trial, felony financial fraud, 5 years probation, full restitution in the high 6 figures paid over time, and a permanent restraining order barring her from any contact with me or company assets. The criminal record would shadow her for life. No more financial licenses, no more positions of trust or power. Then it was Hudson's turn. A new resolution was introduced. The major shareholders, many of whom had been clients for decades, demanded his immediate removal as CEO. The tally, unanimous. Hudson offered no protest. He simply sat there motionless as the decision was recorded in the minutes. The fallout hit fast and hard. As word leaked out, clients began pulling accounts. The company's valuation plummeted. My father, Philip, returned from an overseas trip to face a brutal reality: emergency loans, mounting legal costs, and a firm no longer standing on solid ground. In the end, he was forced to sell off most of his remaining shares at fire sale prices to cover settlements and keep the company from total collapse under new interim leadership. Diane filed for divorce just 1 month after the meeting. She left quietly, retained her own counsel, and took what she could in the property division. Not long afterward, the family home went on the market. Through Vincent, I regained full legal ownership of my original shares. No further disputes once the fraud was confirmed. The board approved the transfer without a single objection. I didn't attend in person. Everything was handled remotely. With those assets secured, along with a modest civil settlement, I walked away for good. I used those shares as seed capital and built my own company from absolute zero. No family name, no lingering ties to the past. 10 years passed before I heard from any of them again. 10 years later, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of the office in the company I built with my own hands, I finally grasped just how far I had come. My firm grew steadily, one deliberate step at a time, from a modest single-room startup to a respected name in the industry. Clients came for reputation and results, not family ties. Revenue climbed year after year. Assets under management soared past anything the old company had ever touched. Once the finances were solid, I no longer worried about the next payroll or had to prove my worth to anyone who had once doubted me. Life settled into a quiet rhythm, a trustworthy team, sustainable growth, evenings free of drama. Then the letter arrived. It reached Vincent Hayes, first forwarded from an outdated address. Handwritten on plain white paper, mailed from a nursing care facility on the outskirts of Dallas. My father, Philip, wrote that his health had collapsed after a series of strokes. He wanted to see me one last time to apologize in person before things grew worse. I read the letter once, folded it, left it on my desk for an entire day. Vincent called to ask how I wished to respond. My answer was brief draft, a reply stating clearly that I would not visit and would not resume contact. No explanations, no openings left. He sent it on official legal letterhead. And that was the end of it. I blocked the remaining stray numbers, updated records to sever any lingering ties, and moved forward without looking back. Toxic family isn't worth clinging to, no matter the blood shared. True justice comes from truth and timely action, and a person's greatest strength lies in drawing firm boundaries, then resolutely releasing those who never deserve the space they once occupied in your life.